Welcome to Contagiously Curious. Today we're going to be looking at the building blocks of culture. Specifically going to be looking at a couple of ways that people have studied culture, ways that people have tried to identify the differences between cultures. One of the first ones is an author, Craig Storti. He wrote a book called Figuring Foreigners Out. He also helped write a manual for the Peace Corps. He came up with basically four building blocks of culture. Aside from that, I want to look into Hofstede's. I want to look into Hofstede's cultural dimensions, and then finally at the paradigm guilt, shame, fear as another paradigm for looking at culture. So let's dive in. First thing, building blocks of culture. We have Craig Storti wrote Figuring Foreigners Out. Let's make that a little bigger. Here and okay, so he had four building blocks. I don't like that. Let's left align. Okay. Figuring Foreigners Out. Subtitle of the book was something like Understanding the World's Cultures. The first of which was concept of self. So another way that we could describe this is there are cultures that are individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures. Which is primarily, how do you view yourself? Do you view yourself well, as an individual? Or do you think about, okay, I am who I am entirely because of me, versus I am who I am because of the group I'm a part of, because of my connection. How are you forming that identity? Now, I will say with all of these things, we could say that each one of these elements, it's more of a spectrum where you could be on one end of a spectrum or another. With Hofstede's cultural dimensions, they actually made a score and sampled a lot of people and looked for averages for how frequently one type of answer was going to be given from a specific culture. And so when they scored this, they got the averages of the countries. And so, well, maybe had one country here with like a 90, another culture will be right in the middle with a 50, another one here, whatever. Just like your personality tests, you got people all over the spectrum. Same too with cultures, all through the spectrums. And then even within one culture, you're going to have some, like, let's say Americans. You're going to have some Americans that are far more individualistic and some that are far more collectivist. But they will be here somewhere on this spectrum. And so these exist, spectrum exists for each of Craig Storti's building blocks of culture, but also for Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Okay. So I'm American, and Americans tend to be, I don't know, somewhere like here towards individualistic versus collectivistic. And somewhere where your group identity, like you are part of a group, think, let's say USA. think China is typically used as an example of someone where it's very important to be part of a group. I think you could look up pictures of soccer teams, like the national soccer teams. I think the American way of doing things is everyone has the coolest, flashiest cleats. Like who's got the best extra stuff? Your people are trying to stand out from the crowd. They want to stand out as being special. But in China, that would be I don't know. Maybe it would be frowned upon, but it certainly wouldn't be the goal. The goal would be to show the unity. Look how we are a group. Look how we are all together. Um, that's one of my primary ideas behind making about streaming this today is uh, it all comes down to values. It all comes down to valuing different things. And it really affects the way your outlook on the world, the way you think about everything. And so we see in that for Americans, if they're thinking about when they're thinking about that soccer team, like what am I going to wear? It's thinking about I want to be the legend. I want to be the great one that stands out, like the Michael Jordan, the Michael Phelps, the Tom Brady, the whoever it is, whatever sport. I want to be the one great one that everyone remembers. Um, and so it's kind of idolizing or considering those people as heroes and looking for greatness and trying to replicate it. You know, you could say those are some of the values. And that's not to say that China, or let's just say collectivist cultures, don't care anything about that. They do care about it, but it's not the primary value. In China, it's more about unity. What can we do to have greater unity? And you see, this isn't exactly a spectrum of caring about, I don't know, individual greatness versus caring about unity. It's not the American players don't think about unity or that they don't care about unity. It's just it's not the main value. So to frame it as a question of unity doesn't exactly make sense in American culture. And I think there are some examples. I want to say that maybe German or Norwegian, Scandinavian cultures are even more individualistic than Americans. I believe that is what I read. Anyway, so we could say, you know, they two different values here. One really caring about unity. What can I do to make sure that we are? How can I show that I'm part of the team? Oh, and we're all going to wear the exact same thing. And maybe you can see that. I don't know. There's different places where people are going to have maybe they're going to want to wear. Maybe they're going to care more about uniforms. Everyone looking the same. Maybe they're. I feel like synchronous movement in parades or something is a much bigger thing. Perhaps in China or large street performances, something like that. Again, it's not to say that those things don't exist in the West, specifically in America. Just an interesting thing that's a little bit less common. Okay, let's talk about the next one. Bear with me one second. Trying to do this in order. This was an interesting one. Personal versus societal responsibility. And we can add two extra fancy words, which would be particularist and universalist. Although, okay, so this one is kind of looking, oh, it's isms, not ist, whatever. This one is kind of asking, how is the law applied? Not not necessarily just the law, uh, but another way to talk about it would be to say in groups and out group. In group versus out group. That is, the people who are, let's say, your family, immediate family. Well, that's obviously your in group. And it's to say that your in group gets special preferential treatment. Now, obviously, okay, if relationships are good, yeah, your family gets more time, more attention, etc. from you, as opposed to outgroup. But when it comes to other things, when it comes to how friendly are you with a stranger, um, the West typically falls in this category of universalism. That is, saying it doesn't matter who you are, who the person is, all are equal. Universally, you should treat people equal, which is to say, much lower difference between in-group and out-group. Let me clean this up a little. Lower preference of in-group versus out-group. Move that there. What would be a good example? There are some countries, we could say in the Middle East or in, I want to say, Africa. Those are where I know for sure it exists. The idea of a clan. Whose clan are you in? What clan are you a part of? Or perhaps it could be a tribe, but just a much more importance on these, what in the West would be like distant relationships of, do you know your fifth cousin, your sixth cousin? In America, typically your in group is not as large. In other countries, or in countries that have this more of a particularism view or more collectivist view, it is looking a whole lot more at what group are you a part of, and then you treat the different groups. You give special preferential treatment to your in group. Trying to think of a good example. I don't know, it might be just simple things of taking care of your in group and then ignoring the out group, or perhaps there's a job interview. A really common idea in the West is, oh, of course you should treat everyone equally. You should not, we frown upon the idea of nepotism. You shouldn't just be treated specially. You shouldn't get the job just because you're related to that person, or you shouldn't get the job because we are really against discrimination, whether it's for race, for religion, for sex, for political party. Generally, we're like, no, you should not choose one. You shouldn't ignore someone just because they are not in the exact same in group as you. But that idea is not held throughout the world. Some other countries say, no, I will bend over backwards. I will do absolutely anything. You call me anytime, day or night. If you're in my in group, I will do it for you. Or out group, oh, I couldn't care less. What are you to me? Nothing. That is a very simplified version of in group versus out group. I don't actually remember where China is on this. I think it's pretty similar to the individualistic versus collectivist we're going to say universalism. That's where American culture falls again, generally. And to be honest, I don't remember with China, but I think when a country is more collectivistic, it is often more follows particularism, which is to have particular treatment based on in-group versus out-group, whereas it's a lot more flat. Yes, we spend more time with family. We have those societal responsibilities to family, but it's not as pronounced of a difference. In fact, we go to great lengths to try to treat everyone equally with our love of universalism. Okay, next one. Concept of time. This is an interesting one, and one that I have kind of I'd say it's a humorous story. Concept of time, I can add one more clarifier to that. Monochronism versus chronic versus polychronic. And I will have some pictures later on that will really cover what this is talking about. Monochronic versus polychronic cultures. Monochronic cultures really care about doing things at the exact time that you said you would do them. You can think of certain countries where the train is there on the dot every single time. You know exactly when it's going to be. I think Germany is a good example of one that cares a lot about punctuality. That doesn't mean that trains aren't late, but that they are, they're all about engineering and efficiency. Those are the stereotypical ideas about German culture. Versus, I've heard in Spain, a very polychronic culture. You hear that the tour starts at 10 a.m. and the tour guide shows up at 11 a.m. along with, let's say, any Spaniards that were going to be on the tour. And so that can be really frustrating when you have that clash, when you have that difference of monochronic versus polychronic cultures. When people have these different values, that's where you're getting these clashes. That's where you're getting the frustration or the annoyance or maybe negative stereotypes of other cultures. It's generally because of not understanding the other values, so that's misunderstanding. But even if you did understand it, you might still be annoyed because you have different values. So, my family had neighbors from South America. South America is very polychronic, and American culture is generally pretty monochronic. Maybe not as much as, again, some Scandinavian or Northern European cultures, but by and large, care a lot about it. Our family was invited over to this Chilean family's house for dinner, and they said, "Oh yeah, come over at 6 o'clock." They were literally our next door neighbors, so it was probably 5:57, 5:58. We walked over, so actually a minute or two early. This Chilean family was probably surprised. They didn't show it, but they were probably surprised. And the reason I can understand that is because dinner was not ready. And continued, we had some snacks like some chips and salsa, but dinner was not ready until about 7 o'clock. I think if they had been in Chile, and they had invited over another Chilean family at 6 o'clock, that would mean like, oh yeah, come at 6. Well, yeah, take your time, get it here whenever you want, and you'll probably show up at maybe 6:45, 7, and then we can have our conversation and eat. And then also, I want to say, in these polychronic cultures, generally gatherings are much longer and drawn out, and stay over and spend a lot of time at someone's house. Whereas in monochronic culture, it's almost like, okay, well, I've been here 2 hours, it's time for me to leave. So these are just different values. I haven't been updating this. These are just different values. With polychronic, the focus is very often on relationships, but if you say, "Oh, my friend showed up late," that how is that value in my relationship? We're caring more. Western cultures care a lot more about. It's almost like time and efficiency, which we also connect to like keeping your word. Um, well, what's an example? Okay, let's say I'm meeting with a friend for coffee at 10 o'clock, and I'm actually supposed to go get lunch with another friend at 12 o'clock. Very social. Um, if at 11, let's say at 11:30, a deep conversation starts to happen, what is the likelihood that I will just keep staying there and listen to that friend with opening up their heart to me? What's the likelihood that I stay with them until 2 o'clock and then go to lunch at 2:15 to meet the other friend that's late? In a monochronic culture, that's like, wow, that was you were so rude to the one you had scheduled lunch with. Um, but the polychronic culture would say, well, what's the other option? If at 11:45 you're like, I'm sorry, I know this is really important to you and this is deep. I'd love to hear it another time, but I'm gonna go have lunch with my friend. In the polychronic culture, that is incredibly rude. Like, wow, you just care about time and efficiency. What about the friend that you're having? What about the friend that you are having this deep conversation with? Surely the friend at lunch is going to understand why. Yeah, of course you're late. Things happen, and so that's a little bit of an example of how there's different values underlying this, and it's not that people just monochronic cultures don't value flexibility and are not understanding when things come up. Uh, or it's not that polychronic cultures, like I want to say Latin, Spanish. I feel like Greeks have a stereotype for it. I'm not sure. Middle Easterns in general are going to be your polychronic cultures. And then again, German, Scandinavian, American are going to be more monochronic. Let's add that. Here we go. Monochronic, polychronic. And again, I really don't know how far they are here. Maybe we'll say we're a little bit more flexible. I'm not actually sure. And again, I don't know Chinese culture, so I can't comment on that. But let's move on to the fourth one. This is getting off the screen. Okay, last one. Locus of control. It's going to be either external or internal. Move it down here. Okay, locus of control. What is that? Probably not almost certainly not a phrase you've ever heard of. It's asking, it's kind of like belief in fate. It's not, but it's similar to it, which is where is the center of control in your life? America is probably at the extreme end of internal control. Internal locus control. This is America. Some other cultures, I'm not sure. I want to say Middle Eastern cultures in general fall over here. Middle East. Okay. Locus of control. It is connected exactly to ideas, not ideas of fate, but if you have an internal locus of control, that's to say I have control of my life. If my circumstances, I can change them. Whereas external locus control is to say, these things are out of my control. There's nothing I can do about it. That's just the way it is. So if you were to believe in fate, like 100% believe in it, that would shape the way that you make decisions throughout the day. Oh, this happened. Well, I got a flat tire. Ah, it was fate. I was meant to be late to work. Or perhaps you've gotten lots of poor grades throughout school. Maybe you're thinking, oh, it was just my fate to be a bad student. And there's not going to be any, maybe not say there won't be any attempt to change, but there's going to be a strong tendency in that culture to not to believe that the change isn't possible, or that it would not be fruitful. Whereas America, of course, has a very can-do attitude. Yeah, I can do anything. Don't accept your lot in your life. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go do whatever you need to do. Figure it out. In a way that is a large part of the American dream, to say you can do anything. You can work hard and you can move up and you can make something of yourself. That is a very internal locus of control. And then so, if a situation came up where, let's use a professional workspace situation. You're trying to get access to some data or some software or something that is controlled by corporate, and you ask them, because you need this data to report to your boss, and you ask corporate, and corporate says no. What do you do? Well, in external locus of control, well, corporate said no. It's not in my control. That's it. I can't change corporate. Whereas internal locus of control usually is going to much likely accept that and sit still. It's going to be like, no, I'm gonna make this happen. I will get those results because I don't believe that. I'm not going to let that stop me. That's an example of internal locus of control. Yeah. So if you had, like I said, with fate, if you had theistic beliefs that said God determines everything, if it was all determined, then you would be very external locus of control. But if you were believing more everything's free will, that's going to align more with internal locus of control. And then, of course, some things, you don't control the weather. You don't control. There are a great number of things that we do not, that you literally do not have control of. And so perhaps we say, reality is somewhere on here, and your circumstances will change throughout life. But if you have a tendency to say, I will never let that stop me, I will never accept it, and maybe sometimes you will end up bashing your head against a wall, saying, no, I won't stop. I won't let this stop me. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And you could end up wasting some time instead of moving on to the next thing and then being successful at that, whatever endeavor it is you're pursuing. So anyways, those are some examples. In general, those are the ones that Craig Storti had. I don't remember if he had any specific numbers associated with them, but let's move on to Hofstede's cultural dimension. Some of these are pretty good. Is there eraser? Looking for the eraser. I don't see it. Nope. I'm still drawing. actually. Nope, we're deleting that. Okay. Moving on to Hofstede's cultural stuff. Okay, Hofstede had 6 cultural dimensions. The first one is power difference. So power distance is kind of saying, it's looking at the distance, like how much difference is there in power between, let's say, you and your parents versus you and your boss versus you and the president or people. If someone has authority, what is the degree of acceptable unequal power distribution? And again, we could look at the cultures. We could look at some situations that we were talking about earlier. Let's say this is power difference. It's going to be low versus high. So America is a very low power distance. In that you'll tell your boss off, tell him whatever you think. Or maybe we could say that they're like, it would not be maybe necessarily surprising if, or shocking to culture, if a homeless person, or, you know, I'm using that as an example of someone who would potentially be considered low class, low status. If a homeless person shouted at the president and called them terrible things, you know, that's an example of a low power distance where we don't have that great view of the great distance, so where you're just completely deferential, just showing complete honor towards all figures of authority. In fact, you know, there's whole lots of cultural elements that are about disrespecting authority and say, no one has authority over me, and being rebellious, being, you know, almost anarchical, versus on the other end, say China. China is a great example, because of the, let's say, partially the absolute control that the CCP has. You couldn't imagine any person saying terrible things to Xi Jinping, because they know they would immediately be punished, because that's not acceptable in the culture. It's unthinkable. But it's also, if your boss says something wrong in America, you're going to tell the boss, hey, that was wrong. Now, you might be respectful when you say it, like, sir, I think this was incorrect. But you're going to say it, most likely. In China, or we could say in high power distance cultures, you're not going to do that. You know, they have the authority. And so, and the culture really, really values that leadership and not questioning, not going against them. And part of that we could say is valuing, perhaps we could say, tradition, respecting these roles that you've always had, or that have existed for a long time, continuing that tradition of respecting elders, respecting authority. And that's a good word, actually, respect, just in general. We can think of how respectful Japanese culture is portrayed as, bowing, respecting people, just very polite in general, viewing being in society, being out in the public, being very polite is important. Big problem with the nuisance streamers, I think, in Japan and South Korea, which is an example of low power distance going into high power distance, and not even just power power distance, but also we see there the individualism and collectivism. Individual standing out versus blending in versus not being uniting or caring about harmony, not valuing those things, and instead being disrupting. So we got some big cultural clashes there where different things are being valued. And that is actually the next one in Hofstede's, which was individualism versus collectivism. Okay, we already covered that one. Hofstede basically did it the exact same way as Craig Storti. I don't actually know which one was first. I think Craig Storti was writing his stuff in the late 90s, so I'm not sure about Hofstede. Individualism versus collectivism, a brief definition there is emphasis on individual achievements versus group loyalty. So you see, comparing achievements versus loyalty, those are not, it's not the same thing. It's not achievements versus no achievements, or loyalty versus disloyalty. No, it's valuing completely different things when it comes to these specific kinds of dynamics versus individual group dynamics. Okay, 3, Hofstede had masculinity versus femininity. So many eyes. Okay, masculinity versus femininity. That is value placed on assertiveness versus relationships and quality of life. Now, I'm actually not too familiar with Hofstede's here, but it does look at distribution of roles between genders, the value placed on assertiveness versus relationships and quality of life. I'm going to read something about it real quick. In masculine societies, the roles of men and women overlap less. So they have very clearly defined roles, unless anyone can do this. We see that in different professions where men tend to do a specific one and women tend to do another one. In masculine cultures, maybe you'll see that far more often, or maybe you'll even see where, no, of course, that's only men. Oh, of course, that's only for women. That'll be more common in these that are called masculine cultures, whereas in those, they also really value demonstrating your success and being strong and fast. Whereas in feminine societies, there's more overlap between male and female roles, and modesty is perceived as a virtue. That's what Hofstede wrote. Greater importance is placed on good relationships with your direct supervisors or working with people who cooperate well with one another. And again, we can probably imagine that's going to align well with unity and harmony. Number 4. Number 4 is uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance. So comfort with ambiguity and change. This one's kind of interesting. We can maybe see a connection with over here locus of control. If you view everything as out of your control, perhaps then you're going to be more comfortable with ambiguity and change because I wasn't going to change it. The chips are going to fall where they may. Not in my control. I don't need to worry about it. It's not my responsibility. It's not something I need to stress over. For societies that have a high uncertainty avoidance, they're less likely to make risky moves, or maybe just moves that are perceived as risky, or if there's just a lot more unknown, uncertain things. Low scoring ones are more relaxed, open, or inclusive. It's not the same. Avoiding uncertainty is not the same as avoiding risk. There is that difference there, where it's not that I'm not going to take a risk. They might engage in risky behavior precisely because it reduces ambiguities or to avoid failure. And others, they might be tempted to take the safest, the most conservative decisions. That's the other possibility. That's the other end of the spectrum. Okay, number 5. Short-term versus long-term orientation. Focused on immediate or thinking in a here and now. I'm going to say in the US, let's say in US politics, we've got these 4-year or sometimes even 2-year cycles. And people are very focused on now, what's happening now. And China, how long have they had their leader? How long will they continue to have them? How long will they have the next one? Things are much more rigid and not changing, and more focused on long-term strategies. And that's just one example in terms of politics. But there are far more examples. Let me pull one up. Originally, originally it was described as pragmatic versus normative. So countries with long-term orientation tend to be pragmatic, modest, and more thrifty. Whereas in short-term oriented countries, people tend to place more emphasis on principles, consistency, truth, and are typically religious and nationalistic. Interesting. The US, for example, has a relatively short-term orientation. It's reflected in the importance of short-term gains and quick results. Profits and loss statements are quarterly, for example. It's also reflected in the country's strong sense of nationalism and social standards. And we can see that also what I was just saying with the political example. That's directly aligned. Sometimes it makes you wonder where did these specific values come from? Where do they develop out of? And that's something I'll be talking about more in the future. Need to be doing some more research and deep diving on that, but these are the kind of topics. What values do we have and where do they come from that I like to cover? Okay, number 6. Indulgence versus restraint. That one's kind of self-explanatory. If you're restraining, then you're going to have if you're indulgent, you're going to allow or encourage relatively free gratification of people's drives and emotions, such as enjoying life and having fun. But if the society has a low score in that, there's much more of an emphasis on suppressing gratification, more regulation of people's conduct and behavior, and stricter social norms. Eastern European countries, including Russia, have low scores. I think maybe the stoicism, or we can think of Russians, I think, typically being cold and harsh, not smiling, not fun. That's maybe some of the stereotypes, but that would be indicative of a root culture that is restraining, so scoring low on this indulgence versus restraint, versus there certainly have been trends in America to be extremely indulgent in any whims. I don't know where the whole of society stands in that spectrum, but those are 2 good examples: Russia versus America. Okay, and then our last way to look at culture for today is going to be the guilt, shame, fear paradigm. I believe this one is actually, I'm not 100%, I don't want to misspeak. I think, I know the ideas have at least been developed by missionaries. I don't know if they created the ideas though, but they were looking at ways that how does the society, maybe we can say relate, I'll say relate to sin. It doesn't have to be religious language. Obviously, there are societies and cultures around the world that are not religious, but that doesn't mean that they're suddenly free from this paradigm. Maybe we could say evil, or maybe it's, I think the thinking of right versus wrong sort of fits here, but it doesn't completely. Anyways, okay, so each of these has its own spectrum. And this one is actually going to be a bit more of a triangle, because and a culture could be here versus it could be here, it could be in the center, it could be a mix of the three of them. But let's say we're going to say guilt, shame, fear. Okay, and each of these has a double-sided. So it's guilt and innocence. Now, America is a guilt and innocence culture. Now, we're not only guilt and innocence, but we're probably somewhere like here. And I'll tell you each of the doubles. So guilt and innocence, honor versus shame, power versus fear. So it was originally, well, no, I don't know if it was originally. The idea has been developed by missionaries for how to share the gospel with different cultures, which is to say, if you just go and try and tell them, hey, this is Christianity and you have to do it exactly like a Westerner, the idea is that's wrong and also ineffective. And so needing to understand how would people interact with or view right versus wrong, to then talk about who God is and his relationship with them in terms of which of these three paradigms. So with guilt versus innocence, it's typically going to focus on the individual and are you guilty? Did you do something wrong or did you not do something wrong? You know, are you innocent or are you guilty? And then, of course, how you are tracking the gospel onto that is maybe looking at some passages in Romans saying, you have sinned, you are guilty of sin, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, but Jesus is innocent. He gave his life for you, so you can be given his innocent status and be made right before God. Okay, that's the guilt versus innocent. Honor versus shame. If you try and give that guilt versus innocence message to someone in honor and shame culture, it's just not going to resonate quite the same way. It doesn't track with the underlying beliefs. Instead, honor and shame, which is, you could look at the from the Bible, the parable of the prodigal son, which is the son that doesn't care about his father's, just wants his inheritance from his father, which is another way of saying, you could be dead to me. I don't care. I just want your money. And then going and off and squandering it and, you know, living a indulgent lifestyle, and then coming back broke, being foolish, and then thinking, oh, maybe I could just work as a servant in my father's house, because the servants never were hungry. And then coming back, and then so he comes back with shame because he's broken the tradition and the culture. He's done all the wrong things, and the father honors him. And in doing so, in a way, the father is taking on that son's shame in that scenario. Uh, anyways, so then putting the gospel onto that, you'd say, you have shame. God is honorable, and you are shameful. You know your actions, and God knows all of your actions, all of your thoughts and deeds. But Jesus is honorable, and he has taken your shame, gotten rid of it, and given you his honor. Anyways, that's the honor shame. I think that's a lot of Middle Eastern countries. And I want to say primarily the world is generally between these two paradigms. So this is also probably be a lot of Asia would be honor and shame. Anywhere where you think of a culture that really cares about honor, well, that's going to be an honor shame culture. But the last one, power versus fear, is an interesting one. Sorry, I was writing countries up here. These, I don't know if there's full countries that follow it, but in let's say less organized societies, or smaller forms of organization rather than nation states, clans and tribes, then it's a lot more about power and fear. And this one, I'll be honest, I know less about. But we can say, for the gospel, God is all powerful, and he does not owe you anything. It's almost like a might makes right mentality. If you can impose it on someone, then might makes right. That is the right thing. So that would be also a very high power distance culture thing. If you are, let's say, weak and low status, then you would have fear. You would not want to go against the powerful or the almighty. But we could be saying that, I don't know, maybe it's a bit of the powerful accepts you. You removes your fear. You do not need to be in fear. Something along the lines of that. But again, that one is far less common. These are the most common paradigms. Okay. So those are, in general, several different ways of looking at building blocks of culture. Now there's, like I said, with each of these, when you're on one side or the other, it's having different priorities. So often the same values. Everyone's valuing unity, relationships, respect, valuing your in-groups and your out-groups, valuing time or punctuality, all of these things, but prioritizing, putting them in different orders. And when those stack up against each other, well, you see a different culture acting differently and thinking, oh, they're weird, or they're different from me, versus so that those misunderstandings, versus if you do actually understand, okay, I get that they're different from me, but I don't like it that way. I had quite a bit of experience with that in living in other cultures, living in other countries. Not understanding it, learning about the culture, and then thinking like, man, I appreciate my culture and the way this is. Okay, let's look at a couple of examples. I got a couple prepared here. All right, so there was an artist that did some graphic design, some illustrations to represent cultural ideas. I believe, I know she was a Chinese woman, and I believe she lived in Germany for a while. So you're going to see red and blue, and it's going to represent China and Germany, which can generally, we can kind of abstract that into East versus West. Okay, so this one is talking about the boss. So in Western cultures, the boss, we're seeing them as the same size, whereas this one clear difference. That's going to tie directly into your power distance. It might also be a little bit of locus of control, external versus internal. You know, he has the control, whereas this, we're kind of on the same playing field. So that was interesting. Most of these pictures, they don't all match up directly into one of these elements, but they were just cultural things that she noticed that stood out. Some of them she found really interesting or humorous, and then others maybe a bit insightful into the culture. Okay, next one, opinion. Well, this is also another one, direct versus indirect communication, which is to say exactly what you mean and say it directly and bluntly. That's this straight line here. Versus kind of moving around the issue. Maybe you don't like, maybe someone you care about did something that you don't like. And maybe for the sake of the relationship, you're not going to be so direct and blunt. In some cultures, you will. That's just the way you communicate. Very direct. Other cultures have indirect communication. And again, valuing different things. I was gonna say something about this. With the innocence and guilt, and then honor versus shame. One example, our cultures are a mix, and also within American culture, we have different elements of these combined. So there is actually a bit of honor and shame culture in America in specific areas. I want to say it's definitely in the military behaves a bit more honor and shame. And I also think in high school behaves a bit more honor and shame. But in general, the US is very guilt innocence oriented. And then the same here. A lot of people are going to speak very directly in America. But then maybe certain questions, like your wife asking you, does this dress make me look fat? Oh, no, well, it's, I don't know. You might not say it directly, or, pad your communication, something like that. That'll be less direct. Okay. This one, just an interesting one that she noticed. Transport. Germany, driving cars, and then now, it's getting popular to ride bikes. Whereas I think this is more of in some ways, it's a comment on economic development and different timelines of that. And when countries are more advanced and have some luxury, then it's a trendy thing to ride my bike, to ride my is it fixie? Those bikes with just one gear. I think they're called fixies. Anyways, the hipster bike, the fixies. Ride those around the city. Versus industrializing. So at different stages. But anyways, just noticing differences in culture. Okay. Waiting in line. So this is actually an example of monochronic versus polychronic. Where you can do one thing at a time, just the mono, and it's going to be a nice orderly line. Whereas here, waiting in line is kind of just crowding around just to get a response. Two different ways of doing it, but that's what it's going to look like. And who knows? China, of course, is crowded. Certain cities are just absolutely sprawling and massive, millions and millions of people. Maybe it's out of necessity that it looks like this. You don't have the space to have these nice orderly lines, but also some of it is cultural, just what's normal and what's accepted, and what different values are being considered and prioritized. Okay, here's punctuality. Again, the German versus, just for the picture, it's the Chinese. Again, monochronic versus polychronic. This one, how do you deal with a problem? This is direct, going right over it. This one, avoiding it. It's a interesting picture. I imagine some of this is going to be locus of control, internal versus external, deal directly with the problem. Versus, oh, the problem's there, we can't do anything about it. Let's do something else. Something like that. Was there another one that fits into? Perhaps we could say there's a handful of these that would fit into. Okay. Here, look, negative thoughts. Negative thoughts. That's again that direct communication. Whereas this one, negative thoughts, but perhaps, you know, maybe a friend or someone you care about prepared a meal that you didn't enjoy. Like, oh, I didn't really like that. Direct communication versus, oh, it's delicious. Thank you so much. Now, that's not saying, well, it's not so much like, oh, I don't care about the truth. I'm just going to lie to people. But it is thinking about the respectful thing to do is to tell this person something positive. It'd be respectful to say, I loved the meal. It was fantastic, even if you hated it. So again, harmony, caring about unity, probably more common in collectivist cultures. Again, also depends on your situation, and individuals vary within cultures. Travel, just looking at the tendency to get the perfect picture versus to just sit and experience it. I know both of these kinds of people exist in the West, but I know there are certain cultures that do care a whole lot more about images and what things look like. Usually that's going to be honor and shame cultures. I do know people in, let's say, Hollywood. They care a whole lot more about what they look like than lots of rural America. Lots of rural America is not going to care too much about image. I mean, not that they don't care at all, but it's not a priority. Whereas in Hollywood, I imagine how you're perceived. What kind of car do you drive? What designer clothes do you wear? How much money did you spend on your haircut? Stupid questions like that I couldn't care less about. That's going to be more common in some honor and shame cultures, which is interesting. Hollywood might also be another element of honor and shame. In fact, I imagine it really is honor and shame based. Yeah. Anyways, I'm not sure what else I could say about sitting in and enjoying it. Perhaps we could say this is also related to the short term versus long term. Perhaps it's about economics. If you have more luxury and you're experiencing amazing things more often, maybe that frees you up to sit back and enjoy things. But it is also a bit mindset lifestyle. This one's fun. Trending, which is actually, I think this is a good example of human nature. How, one of those, we've been, with this live stream, it's been talking about the differences between different cultures, how they interact. But this is one that's actually showing the similarities, which is trying things like the other. Like, ooh, I want to try that other thing. Oh, that culture does something cool. I want to try that. There's another example or two in here. This one says in a restaurant. Apparently, I don't know too much about this. It says German restaurants are pretty quiet, and they're really loud in China. I've not spent. I can't verify that, but I think I know. If you think about public transportation, earlier I mentioned nuisance streamers. I think in general, not even just the nuisance streamers, in general, Americans are loud in public transportation. And other countries, let's say, with those nuisance streamers, South Korea and Japan, they're probably going to be very quiet in public transportation. Yeah, there'd be some examples. Seniors throughout the day. Interesting. Spending time with the dog versus spending time with the kid. Again, just cultural observations. Might also be connected to birth rates family structures, and then that would include in-group versus out-group, like how large is your in-group versus your out-group. And then also cultures have different relationships with animals. Some cultures do not like dogs, which is interesting. Americans absolutely love their dogs. Okay. The weather, emotions with the weather. I think it's interesting. The emotions are not viewed as connected to the person's happiness, but here they are. I feel like I relate more with that one. Well, okay, I don't hate the weather. That's interesting. Another interesting old cultural observation. Here, sense of self. Small sense of self versus large sense of self. That again is going to be the individualistic versus collectivist. Opinion, a view of the other. So Germans thinking about Chinese and what they wear, what they drink, what they eat. Chinese thinking about Germans, what they wear, what they eat, what they drink. At a party, getting into groups, into clumps, hanging out and talking with the couple of friends that you came with or whatever, versus everyone all participating in the same activity at the same time. Here we have a whole lot more focus on unity, and let's make unity happen. Let's make sure we're all doing the same thing. Versus do what you want, go, which is more focused on the individual. Each individual person pick what you want and do that, and then you get this pattern. Children and structure. It's interesting what this is saying. You got parents and grandparents, and it's like the child is between the mom and dad, and the grandparents are nearby, versus the child is between all four. So different views on what parenting and how to raise a child looks like. Again, family structure, that's going to be related to in groups and out groups, individualistic versus collectivistic. Three meals a day, cold, cold versus hot, hot. Just an interesting cultural observation. Contacts, connections is probably again related to in-group versus out-group, which is actually maybe it's the exact opposite. I mean, in-group and out-group versus in thinking about like how big your connections are, whereas maybe you'll have a couple close friends, you'll have a small family, versus every single person in my my family, my extended relatives, extended even beyond that, maybe clan. This one was what to drink when your stomach's upset, which is interesting. Cold versus hot. No idea what kind of tea. Maybe this would be 7-Up or something. The street on a Sunday. Day of rest. But this, just another day. I'm not exactly sure. It could also just be cultural observation. Germany versus China. I have no idea what city this artist lived in. This was Yang Liu was the lady. I believe it's a lady. Actually, I don't know. Lifestyle. Independent versus collectivist. Dependent, part of a group. I am who I am, I stand on my own, versus I am in this specific group. I am one of this group. Oh, idea of beauty, which is just in China, they're getting all these skin creams to get your skin color as light as possible, as white and as pale as possible. And in the West, so many people go out and suntan, they're sunbathing and they want to get a golden color for their skin. So anyways, just interesting. Want their skin darker versus want their skin lighter. This one I don't know if I can relate to, but this is showering during the day, maybe during the morning, showering at night. Um, I do not have a specific, I always shower in the morning or always shower at night. So I don't know. This is approach to new things, saying that Germans, she observed Germans not wanting to change, but um, Chinese embracing it. Be like, what is this? With curiosity versus with skepticism. Uh, I don't know too much about this. I think, I mean, I do know change is uncomfortable in general. So maybe American culture is here. This one, uh, the relationship with truth, which is, it was related to the direct communication, indirect communication, and uh, what you're likely to say or not say. So not saying what they're thinking. And again, that's tied in a lot to honor and shame cultures, um, different priorities. Okay. Mm. Seniors in society. Here kind of viewed as um, weak and dependent. Probably that's the main word, dependent. And because dependent in a culture that prioritizes independence and being your own person, being an individual, the elderly are dependent in that uh, less physically capable, need help, need someone to take care of them, and so thus viewed as a little bit lesser. Whereas in a culture with, let's say, again, the high power distance um, and a higher view of a much higher priority of respect and tradition and honor, they're viewed as, wow, that's the person to look up to. That's the person with the answers. And there's lots of respect there. Newcomer. This person's, I think, kind of, this again is individual versus collectivist. The newcomers on the outside, and that person's going to need to do it on their own and go in and make new friends. Whereas, and maybe for the German culture, again, it's about the change, not liking the idea of change. Whereas here, oh, look at the unity. We are all one and the same. You are in the group, even though you are new. You are completely one of us. I think that was the last of them. All right, so wrap it all up. Those are the building blocks of culture. Um, this is something that I think is really interesting when it comes to looking at specific examples. Looking at, I love looking at values and seeing what is differentiating these things. Why are people's actions so different in different situations? Why does this culture do this and that one do that? And I also really like how it plays out, or I like analyzing how it plays out when it comes to um, my own culture, my own country, um, and in politics, particularly when things are extra polarizing. When you have two people on two different sides looking at the same thing and coming to opposite conclusions. Why is that? And again, it's going to be right here. It's the values are different. And sometimes it's surprising when it's within your own culture and it's almost subcultures within that. But these different beliefs, different underlying assumptions lead to drastically different ideas about the same set of facts. So that's what I'm going to be covering in the near future. If you enjoyed this, if you want to know more about it, I'll leave some notes in the description about figuring foreigners out, Hofstede's cultural dimensions, the guilt, shame, fear paradigm, and you can catch me trying to be streaming every Thursday at 7 o'clock Eastern time. So this was Contagiously Curious.